Welcome to the Get Published podcast, sponsored by Brodie Consulting Group. To get more information about our coaching, publishing, executive ghostwriting, and podcast production services, go to getpublishedpodcast.com. Hello, I am Paul Brodie, and thank you for joining us for another episode of the Get Published podcast, where we help authors get published with a proven system that works. Today, we're being joined by Phil Circle, author of The Outback Musician's Survival Guide. Phil, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Paul. It's a pleasure to be here.
Are you ready to get started?
I sure am.
All right. Question number one. What is the one piece of advice that you would give to a first-time author who is currently writing their book?
If you're in the process of writing your book and you're unsure where to start, if you haven't already, or if you're partway through and don't know where to go from there, don't make the mistake that I made, which is why it took me 20 years to write my book, and think that it has to be chronological. Just write one chapter now, and then you move on to the next thing that is so inspired. And then you can take them and throw them out on the table like a deck of cards and piece them together, and bang, you got a book. And that's pretty much how mine fell together. But get in there and do the work. I have a friend on my record label who is an architect as well as a songwriter, and he said, he was talking about just this very thing in an interview he and I did together. He said, don't wait for the inspiration. Start the work. The inspiration will find its way in there. Of course, if the inspiration comes, jump on it. But yeah, just do the work. Get it done. You can throw stuff out if you don't like it.
And what do you feel is the hardest part about getting published?
Well, if you're going through a major publisher or a not so major publisher, I would have to venture a guess that getting their attention amongst the literally millions of authors out there, and getting across that there's something particularly unique or better written about your story that's going to relate to, in a publishing company's view, I think the widest common denominator. However, the other way to go is self-publish, which is what I did, and I go for the smallest viable audience and thereby reach very specific people who are the ones that totally relate to my story. So either way, it's difficult from the standpoint of getting a publisher, getting their attention. From the standpoint of being your own publisher, well, you need money to start with, and then guess what? You're doing all the work,
Well, one thing you mentioned prior to our interview was you mentioned you were always an independent musician, and then you also went the independent route with your book. So tell us a little more about that journey.
Okay, well, I'm a singer-songwriter, guitarist, music coach, and a producer in Chicago, born and raised and everything here. So for more than 30 years now, I've been making my living, albeit at times by the skin of my teeth, as an independent musician. It, of course, became a whole lot easier when the internet became something that somebody other than the Department of Defense could use. And I have been adaptable as an entrepreneur the whole time in order to respond to the changes and put them to best use. So then when I decided to sit down and write my book, which happened as a result of a number of life challenges, including health issues, including being, I say, stranded in a nice way in Wisconsin for a while, where my wife was from, with a lot of downtime. I sat down to put together the book that everybody had been telling me I should write. And as I was considering whether I should pursue somebody publishing it for me or doing it myself, it took me about 2 seconds to come to the conclusion that as an independent musician who has always been an advocate of being independent, always been in my record label is only a means to train other artists to do their own work. They keep every penny that they make. If I'm doing that and living that life, it seemed to go against the grain if I said, well, yeah, I know, I'm an independent musician writing my story as an independent musician, but I'm getting published by a major publishing firm. That seemed like it just didn't work. So if I'm going to keep doing it on my own, I may as well do it on my own this time.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. So appreciate you sharing that with us, because when you were telling me about that, I was like, man, we got to talk about that on the show, because that makes complete logic with exactly what you're doing with your journey and everything.
Yeah, and the journey is a big part of what it's all about. That's even from the marketing standpoint.
Yep.
The key to getting it out there to a lot of people when you're an independent, or you're doing at least a lot of your own work, or you're talking about it on podcasts like this. It's sharing with people the story of your journey. It lets people know that's really 90% of the work. Continuing.
Exactly. Well, speaking of marketing, I'd like to ask you to please share a marketing strategy that you have used in your book launch that has worked well.
Well, one valuable thing to look at, I think, whenever I've been involved in any kind of business related stuff, and of course, before music was my whole living, I had various side businesses, and I approached them in the same way. And when I coach students in being musical entrepreneurs, or if they're talking about starting their own business, etc., I'm always asking the first question: what's different about you? I was just talking to a student yesterday. He wants to do more marketing for artists, and he was telling me how he was going about it. And then I said, well, the only thing anybody cares about is what's different about you. That's the only thing they want to know. So what's different about your book? What's different about your story in this book, if it's about you? Or what's different about the story in this book? Oh, I have a book about cowboys. Well, yeah, so do like 100,000 other people. What's different about them? Well, these are cowboys in the 21st century after the apocalypse. Okay, that's different, that sort of thing. So look for what's different about your story. And it isn't, I'm afraid to say, it isn't, oh, well, it's different because I created it and I have this brilliant and unique idea. You have to step away from it. You have to be objective and look at it from the standpoint of a constructive, critical eye, ear, heart, spirit, to get a sense of what really is different, not what you think or feel is different. And you can get that from people that you can trust. Ask people that you trust, what is this book really about? What is this story about? Now, in my case, the fact that it's about my life, it's not a how-to book. It's about my life so far as an independent musician. It demonstrates what the so-called 99% in the music world go through, that it's pretty much the same as the ones you hear about. You just don't hear about it so much. The same struggles exist for good and bad, and I willingly shared them all. That made it immediately marketable to the music world. And for the most part, when I go on a podcast or a radio interview and talk about my music, I'm able to talk about my book because that's part of the story. So there's the cross-marketing aspect of it as well,
Well, and that's what I wanted to ask you too. What specific launch strategies did you have when the book launched?
Well, I know a guy from who writes for the Chicago Tribune and Downbeat magazine, and he wrote a book about Aretha Franklin that published not long before she passed away, and he was quoted in other books about that. He then wrote a book about Chicago's soul music and stuff. So he's just the right guy to ask, can you, be the host at my launch at an independent bookstore here in Chicago? I actually did go to a big name bookstore right in the neighborhood where I grew up, but they didn't give me the time of day. So I went to an independent bookstore that I already had a relationship with, and I did my launch there. So again, I used the independent aspect of it, and I brought somebody in who, in addition to drawing attention to it because of who he is, and also because I was smart enough to record the thing, I got a free review on my book by a guy from Downbeat magazine. So you can pull cross-purpose moves into things to create the excitement. and then stream live. Use technology. Don't be one of these. Oh, if you're talking like Facebook and all these things are a fad or it's just for the kids. Well, that's the same thing radio listeners were saying in 1948 as TV was hitting the world. No, they are not going anywhere. Use them. I don't mind, in fact, when I'm at a show, if people are pulling out their phones, taking pictures or going live, that's free marketing, so use that kind of stuff. Get people there going live when you're at your book launch, even for just a couple minutes.
Well, one thing you mentioned in particular, Phil, was talking about leveraging relationships with independent bookstores. So could you give us a couple examples of how you were able to do that?
Well, yeah, and in particular with the one that I did my launch at, I'd been going in there for years and putting up posters, and I'd come to know the manager and her husband just in the music scene. They started coming out to shows. So use any relationships that you already have. But then, yes, you can create other relationships. Start with the places that you already patronize, that you already support. It's not like, oh, I scratch your back, you scratch mine. It's simply that you have a relationship.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's exactly like I tell the artists on my record label. I removed the rejection factor for them by doing all the submitting of their music to radio and everywhere. And then when they get accepted, I send them the acceptance email. And I tell them, go make a relationship, because that's all I've been doing for 30 plus years is creating relationships and keeping them alive. So that's what you're doing. And some of it bears fruit now, some of it bears fruit later. But do not burn the bridges, and show a lot of gratitude. Gratitude and a little faith in the people you're working with, and you're pretty much unstoppable.
And it's amazing what you can do with a personal touch.
Yeah, totally. And that's what people want now. The world is incredibly overwhelming.
Yep.
And it's individual stories is what marketing is all about now. They keep saying that, and it seems like the new trend, but really, that's what's always been the case with me.
Mm-hmm. Connection.
Yeah, absolutely. So you keep making those connections. Hits are not what hits used to be either.
Yep.
The hit musical Hamilton here in Chicago is the Grammy-winning soundtrack only sold a couple 100,000 copies, and less than 1% of the population has seen this hit musical. And if you don't mind rounding, that basically means nobody's seen this hit musical, So hits aren't what they used to be. You with 1,000 really steadfast fans who buy everything that you put out there, you can make a living doing what you love. Why would you choose to do anything else,
Exactly. Well, speaking of books, I'd like to ask, what is your favorite book, and what was the number one thing that you learned from it?
That's a really good and a really tough question. I have so many books that I absolutely love, so I thought about, well, what's a favorite book of mine right now? Because I'm always reading about 3 or 4, 5 books at any given time. Depending on my mood, I pick a different one up. But there's a book by the guy who wrote *Sapiens*, a history of humans from an anthropological standpoint. That's absolutely a brilliant piece of work, an easy read. You don't have to be a scientist. But he had a couple follow-up books, and the third one in a row there was 21 Lessons for the 21st Century. It's by Noah Yuval Harari, and it can be a little anxiety ridden, or you can feel a little anxiety ridden as you go through it, because he's talking about the immense changes happening in the world, but he's also talking about how we contend with them. And so that book has driven me to pick up various other books that help me in my work as an artist, because my job is to tell a lot of people's stories, not just my own. The job of any artist is to create value in life. And it also helps me as a middle-aged guy, in contending with a world that has changed immensely since I was born. And it gives me a lot of reason for hope and tools to find more hope that I can bring also to my students and the people that I mentor. So 21 Lessons for the 21st Century.
And for a final question, what is your favorite quote and why?
Yeah, be the change you want to be in the world.
Gandhi.
Yep, yep. And I ripped it off. It's on the back of my record label T-shirt. Be the change you want to hear in the world.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, so to encourage people to listen to something other than the mainstream. I don't have anything against a lot of mainstream artists. I'm not that guy, but more than half the music out there is being streamed now as independent artists. So I like to encourage that.
Well, Phil, I want to thank you for being a guest on the show. What is the best way for people to find you online?
The best way to find me and everything that I do is to go to my website, philcirclemusic.com. Phil the name, circle the shape, music, the art form.com. And that will lead you to all my music. That will lead you to my book. That will lead you to everything that I do. And you can also just look up Phil Circle, my name, and I will pop up like crazy. Please follow me, message me. I love talking to people. I'm on all the social media platforms, and I'm active on them and respond every day to messages.
Well, Phil, thank you once again for being on the show, and I wish you all the best in your author journey ahead.
Paul, thank you very much, and thank you for what you do.
Thanks again for joining us today. To learn more about how you can be featured in our brand new Get Published business book, go to getpublishedpodcast.com.